It was 11:45 at night when my phone lit up on the nightstand. A single notification from my mother, Catherine. I swiped it open, expecting an emergency. Instead, I saw a photo. It was my home office in their basement, the bunker they let me rent, but it looked like a crime scene. My server racks, my coding manuals, my prototype hardware, everything was shoved into black industrial garbage bags. Underneath, a caption read, "We need this space for Chloe's new study. Real scholars need room to think. Come get your junk by morning or it goes to the dump." 3 seconds later, a second notification popped up. My sister Chloe had hearted the message. Before we find out how Grace responds to this absolute betrayal of her life's work, drop a comment and let me know where you're listening from and what time it is for you right now. I'd love to know who's part of our community. I stared at the screen until it went black. I didn't cry. I didn't throw the phone across the room. Panic is a luxury for people who haven't spent 10 years building firewalls around their emotions. Instead, I zoomed in on the image. I cataloged the damage like I was auditing a security breach. There was my server rack, the proprietary cooling system I had built by hand, currently upside down in a garbage bag next to a pile of old magazines. That junk, as my mother called it, was the central nervous system of Aegis Ventures. To the world, or at least the part of the world that reads tech journals, I was a ghost. A phantom coder who had revolutionized crypto security. But to the residents of the 4-story brownstone in Beacon Hill, I was just Grace. The mistake, the dropout, the stain on the immaculate academic record of the Sterling family. My father, Jeffrey, was the Dean of Humanities. My mother, Catherine, sat on 3 museum boards. My sister, Chloe, was currently writing a dissertation on something obscure and entirely theoretical. In their house, a diploma wasn't just a piece of paper, it was a soul. If you didn't have letters after your name, you didn't exist. I walked to my desk in my actual apartment, a sleek, high-security penthouse downtown that my family didn't know I owned, and sat down. I woke up my main terminal. The screens hummed to life, bathing the room in cool blue light. This was the irony that defined my life. They looked down on me from their ivory tower, sneering at my lack of credentials, while I quietly reinforced the foundations of that tower so it wouldn't collapse under the weight of their pretension. They thought I was scraping by, fixing laptops, and running IT support for spare cash. They let me rent the basement bunker out of what they called pity, but was actually a need for control. They loved having the failure close by. It made the golden child shine brighter. But they didn't know the math. They didn't know that for the last decade, I hadn't just been paying rent. I had been the silent architect of their entire lifestyle. I pulled up the hidden accounts. The mortgage on the Beacon Hill brownstone, paid by a shell corporation I controlled. The endowment that covered their travel expenses to conferences in Paris and Milan, funded by Aegis dividends. The gala tickets, the country club dues, the vintage wines my father served to his colleagues while lamenting the decline of intellectualism. All of it was paid for by the dirty dropout money they despised. I ran the query. Total support over 10 years, $480,000. Nearly $500,000 poured into a family that wouldn't let me sit at the dining table when guests were over because I might say something uncultured. I had paid for the privilege of being their punchline. I had subsidized their snobbery. And now, they were evicting the very tools that printed the money they lived on. They weren't just biting the hand that fed them, they were putting it in a trash compactor. I leaned back, the blue light reflecting in my eyes. The anger finally arrived, but it wasn't hot or messy, it was cold. It was the absolute zero of a server room. They wanted the space for a study? Fine, they could have the space. But they were about to learn exactly how expensive that square footage really was. I opened the secure folder labeled Project Ivy. To anyone else, it might have looked like a standard accounting spreadsheet, a boring list of dates and figures. But to me, it was a forensic record of my own desperation. It was a timeline of every moment I had tried to buy my way back into a family that had already sold me out. I scrolled back to the beginning. I was 20 years old, fresh out of the university I had just dropped out of. My mother called me in tears, her voice pitching up into that frantic, breathless register she used when reality was threatening to crash her carefully curated life. She told me there had been a clerical error with the venue for Chloe's debutante ball. The deposit hadn't cleared. If they didn't pay by 5 o'clock, the reservation would be cancelled, and the humiliation would be terminal. It wasn't a clerical error. It was insufficient funds. They were broke even then, living on credit and fumes. I wired them $9,200 from my very first software licensing check. I told myself I was saving the family honor. But looking at the ledger now, seeing row after row of payments, mortgage arrears, country club dues, tuition supplements, emergency loans that were never repaid, I finally understood the mechanics of my own imprisonment. There is a specific kind of psychological trap that ensnares the scapegoat of a narcissistic family. It is an invisible chain, forged not of steel, but of hope. You normalize the cruelty, because the alternative is to admit that the people who are supposed to love you are incapable of it. You convince yourself that their affection is a vending machine, and if you just insert enough coins, if you just solve enough problems, the love will finally drop out. I had spent 8 years paying tuition for a degree in acceptance that they were never going to grant me. I thought that if I could just be useful enough, profitable enough, the invisible architect of their comfort, they would eventually look at me and see a daughter. But they didn't see a daughter. They saw an asset class. They saw a blind trust that paid the bills without demanding a seat at the board table. I looked at the photo of my servers in the trash bag again. That was the answer. They didn't hate me because I was useless. They hated me because my utility humiliated them. Every dollar I gave them was a reminder that the dropout was keeping the dean afloat. They took my money with one hand and slapped me with the other to re-establish their superiority. I moved my cursor to the active transfers column. The monthly stipend for the Beacon Hill maintenance? Selected. The auto pay for the legacy grant fund? Selected. The credit card payoff for my mother's consulting expenses? Selected. I didn't feel guilty. I felt the cold, clean snap of a chain breaking. I wasn't abandoning them. I was graduating. I hit the cancel button. Then I hit export. I saved the entire history of Project Ivy to a portable drive. If they wanted to treat our relationship like a business transaction, I was going to make sure the audit was thorough. The silent investor was closing the fund. I opened a new, secure window on my terminal and shifted into the role I was born to play, CEO. To anyone watching, I was just a girl in a sweatshirt staring at code. But inside my head, I was conducting a forensic audit that would make a federal prosecutor sweat. I accessed the university's public donor records easy enough for anyone with an internet connection, and then I did something slightly less public. I cross-referenced those records with my father's personal accounts, which I had been managing for years under the guise of helping Dad with the computer. I scrolled through lines of data, looking for the anomaly. It didn't take long. There it was, buried under layers of academic jargon and shell transfers. The smoking gun. For 3 years, my sister Chloe had been the golden girl of the humanities department. She bragged to everyone who would listen, and many who tried not to, about winning the Legacy Scholar Grant. It was a prestigious, full-ride stipend that covered her tuition, her research trips to Europe, and her living expenses while she wrote her dissertation on 18th-century French poetry. My parents used it as a bludgeon at every family dinner. "Chloe won the Legacy Grant," my father would say, looking pointedly at me over his glass of wine. "Grace, remind us, are you still doing IT support?" But the Legacy Scholar Grant didn't exist. There was no board of trustees, no endowment, no rigorous selection process. The donor account funding the grant was a shell, and the money feeding that shell wasn't coming from some benevolent alumnus. It was coming from me. My father had been taking my monthly family support transfers, the money I sent to keep the lights on and the mortgage paid, and funneling it into a donor account he controlled as dean. He was literally laundering my money. He took the dirty cash from his dropout daughter, washed it through the university system, and awarded it to his genius daughter as a merit-based grant. He couldn't bear the thought that his brilliant, credentialed child was being fed by his failure of a child. It would shatter his entire worldview. So he rewrote reality. He turned my financial support into academic prestige. He stole my labor to build a monument to his own ego. I picked up my phone and dialed Uncle Thomas. He picked up on the first ring, his voice rough with sleep and concern. "Grace, Everything okay? Did you know? I asked, my voice flat. Did you know about the grant? There was a pause on the other end, heavy and guilty. I suspected, he said finally. Jeffrey always cared more about the frame than the picture. He couldn't let anyone know you were the one holding the checkbook. He laundered my money, Thomas. He turned me into a scholarship fund for the sister, who won't even look me in the eye. I know, kid, I know. He's a small man in a big chair. I heard the click of a lighter. You ready to take the house down? I'm ready to buy the block, I said, and evict every single lie living on it. 2 days later, the summons arrived. It wasn't a frantic text or a tearful voicemail. That would have been too human for the Sterlings. It was a formal calendar invite sent to my personal email, family emergency meeting, 7 p.m., attendance mandatory. I pulled up to the brownstone in Beacon Hill. From the outside, it looked exactly as it always had, imposing, historic, and superior. But I knew the rot inside the walls. I walked up the steps, the deed to the property resting heavy and cool in my inside blazer jacket pocket. I let myself in. The first thing I noticed was the silence from the basement. The hum of my servers, the white noise that had been the heartbeat of this house for 3 years, was gone. I glanced down the hall. The door to my bunker was open. The room was empty. They hadn't just bagged my equipment, they had purged it. My proprietary cooling units, the custom racks, the hard drives containing early builds of Aegis, likely pawned for pennies or sitting in a landfill. They had scrubbed the stain of my industry to make room for Chloe's theoretical genius. I walked into the drawing room. The atmosphere was less family meeting and more funeral for a pet. Chloe was draped across the chaise lounge, weeping into a silk handkerchief. My mother, Catherine, was standing by the liquor cabinet, pouring a glass of scotch with a hand that wasn't quite steady, and my father, Jeffrey, stood by the fireplace, trying to look like a statesman despite the sweat beading on his forehead. "You're late," he said, not meeting my eyes. "I was working," I said. "You know, that thing people do to earn money." "Sit down, Grace," my mother snapped. "This isn't the time for your sarcasm." I didn't sit. I stood by the door, watching them. "What's the emergency?" Jeffrey cleared his throat. He clasped his hands behind his back, pacing the Persian rug I had paid for in 2019. "We have a situation," he said. "A misunderstanding with the IRS. They are auditing the donor fund. It seems there were some clerical errors in how the legacy grant was filed." "Clerical errors," I repeated. "Is that what we're calling fraud now?" He flinched but didn't stop. "It's a filing issue, but until it is resolved, the accounts are frozen. We need immediate liquidity to hire a specialist legal team and correct the record before the university board finds out. If they find out, the house is at risk. Chloe's grant gets suspended." He finally turned to look at me. "We need a bridge loan." "How much?" I asked. $100,000, he said. By tomorrow morning, the room went dead silent. $100,000. He asked for it like he was asking for a cup of sugar. "I don't have $100,000, Dad." I lied, keeping my voice flat. "I fix computers, remember?" "Don't lie to us!" he shouted, his composure cracking. "We know you save everything. You live in that shoebox apartment, you wear the same clothes, you never go out. You hoard every penny you scrape together while we support you. You have the money, we know you do." "Support me?" I asked. "You just threw my livelihood in the trash." "That junk?" my mother interjected, slamming her glass down. "That was a fire hazard. We did you a favor. And this is how you repay us? We put a roof over your head for 28 years. We tolerated your lack of ambition. We let you live here when you had nowhere else to go. And now, when your sister's future is on the line, you want to play the victim? If you don't transfer the funds," my father said, his voice dropping to a low, dangerous register, "then you are done. No more basement, no more family dinners. You are cut off. Do you understand? You will be a stranger to us." He thought he was holding a gun to my head. He didn't realize he was handing me the ammunition. They were threatening to evict the landlord. "So that's the deal," I said. "Pay up, or get out." "That's the reality," Jeffrey said. "Make a choice, Grace. Are you a daughter, or are you a liability? I don't have $100,000 for you, I said softly. My mother let out a sharp, derisive laugh. She marched over to me, her face twisted in a snarl that ruined the carefully preserved symmetry of her Botox. You uneducated leech. We put a roof over your head. We tolerated your lack of ambition, your little computer hobbies, your complete failure to launch. And now, when your sister's future, the only future in this family that actually matters, is burning down, you want to hoard your pennies? I'm not hoarding pennies, I said. You are a disappointment, she spat. You always have been. You don't understand how the world works, Grace. You don't understand legacy, or reputation, or the cost of greatness. You think small, because you are small. That was the trigger. The final tumbler in the lock clicked into place. The anger didn't rise up like bile, it settled like ice. I reached into my blazer. I am the future, I said, my voice dropping to the flat, absolute frequency of a boardroom execution. I pulled out a manila envelope and placed it on the coffee table. It landed with a heavy, final thud. What is this? Chloe asked, wiping her eyes, her curiosity finally overriding her self-pity. Open it. Chloe reached forward with a trembling hand. She pulled out the first document. Her eyes scanned the header, and her breath hitched. This is the deed to the house. It is, I said. And the document underneath it is the notice of default you tried to hide from the bank 3 months ago. And the document underneath that, I pointed to the thickest stack, is the incorporation paperwork for Aegis Ventures. Aegis? My father went pale, the blood draining from his face so fast he looked waxen. The cybersecurity firm the university uses? The cybersecurity firm everyone uses, I corrected. I didn't spend the last 10 years fixing laptops, Dad. I was building the digital infrastructure that protects half the Fortune 500. I wasn't hoarding pennies. I was building an empire. You own Aegis? He stumbled back, gripping the mantelpiece for support. I am the founder and majority shareholder. My net worth isn't in a savings account, Jeffrey. It's $180 million. The silence that followed wasn't just quiet, it was the sound of a worldview shattering. They looked at me, and for the first time, they didn't see the dropout. They saw the predator. They saw the shark that had been swimming in their goldfish bowl. 180 million, my mother whispered, the fight draining out of her. But you don't have a degree. That is exactly why you are losing everything, I said, stepping into the center of the room. You have spent your entire lives confusing credentials with competence. You think a piece of paper on the wall makes you superior? You think your titles, your galas, your legacy, makes you elite? I looked at my father, shrinking in his suit. There is a difference between having status and being valuable. You have spent decades renting a lifestyle you couldn't afford to impress people who don't care. All to hide the fact that you are hollow. You treated me like the help because I didn't have the costume. But here is the reality, Dad. I bought the costume. I paid for the stage. I kept the lights on so you could play act at being aristocracy. I gestured to the room. To the Persian rugs, the first edition books, the crystal decanters. This isn't power. This is the illusion of power of an empty wallet. You aren't the landlords of this life. You are the tenants. And you are broke. My father sank into the leather armchair I had paid to reupholster last year. He looked old. He looked small. The grandeur of the dean was gone, replaced by the terrifying clarity of a man who realizes he bet on the wrong horse. But we're family, Chloe whimpered, clutching the deed like it was a life raft. No, I said, family doesn't steal, family doesn't lie, family doesn't throw a person's life's work into a garbage bag to make room for a vanity project. I reached down and took the deed from her hands. This is business. And I am closing the account. You have 30 days, I said. My legal team, real lawyers, not the academic theorists you hang out with, will handle the transition. You can't evict family, my mother screamed. You don't have a degree. You don't know how the world works. I know how rent works, I said. And you haven't paid yours in 20 years. I walked out. I didn't slam the door. I just closed it firmly, shutting out the sound of their weeping. Uncle Thomas was waiting in his truck at the curb. He didn't say a word, just gave me a nod, and a high five. 3 weeks later, I stood on the deck of my new home in Malibu. No brownstone, no dust, just glass, and the Pacific Ocean. My phone buzzed. A text from Chloe. Dad is facing an ethics inquiry. We're in a condo, please, Grace. I didn't block them, I just turned the phone over. I had work to do. I opened my laptop to finalize the paperwork for my new foundation, the Uncredentialed Trust. Mission: to provide venture capital and legal aid to self-taught founders who are being financially abused by their families. I wasn't the dropout anymore. I was the dean of a new school, one where merit is the only currency accepted. If you believe that your worth is defined by your work, not a piece of paper, hit that like button, and tell me in the comments, would you have bailed them out, or would you have bought the building?